Hey guys, Unexceptional Rounder here. Welcome to Squeeze Play, episode 17. So that's exciting. 17 episodes of Squeeze Play. And I'm here with EKW or EWK?
EKW.
EKW, right. And we're going to be talking about some hands, watching some play, and see if we can make some money or not. Always the challenge. So we're live right now on Twitch TV and on YouTube. So feel free to watch on either one. I'm going to be mostly monitoring the chat over on YouTube. So if that matters to you, that's where that's going to be at. Also, keep in mind the top two tables. Actually, you know that already. Let's see. Let me refresh, make sure everything's going all right. You guys in the chat, just let me know if you can hear Ed all right and his volume's good. And my volume is okay. I think everything should be okay. So that should work out. And also just, let me know how the quality is. All right. So, one thing I was just talking to Ed about is, and I talked on Twitch. I was just sort of streaming while I was setting up about is like bet sizing and pre-flop bet sizing. And I've always kind of had this idea that it doesn't really matter that much, that the bet sizing isn't particularly important pre-flop. As far as, and by that I mean, whether you open to 3.5 or 3 or 4 pre-flop, it does make a difference in pot size post flop, but I don't think it makes a huge EV difference, per your overall strategy. One thing I've been thinking about though is the fact that the cost of the rake and at low stakes and playing a little bit tighter at low stakes, which is sort of the opposite of I think maybe what I've talked about a little bit before is that, as the players get better, you kind of need to tighten up and play a stronger range until you're comfortable, which that's still true also. But, something to consider is that especially on Revolution, or well, I guess Juicy Stakes specifically, they do dealt rake back. So if I fold every single hand, I still get rake back for all the rake other players paid. Which is one of the reasons I actually joined this site, is because I figured that, if I'm going to be playing with low stakes with a lot of loose fish, that I'm not going to be playing as many pots as them. It's not really true anymore because I'm playing with a bunch of regulars, but the idea still holds that you can play a little tighter, you still get your rake back, and you're not paying as much rake in the pots you're in. So I think pretty much anything below 100 no limit, you should really kind of not tighten up a huge amount, but like say instead of playing like 60% of hands from the button, maybe like 50% of hands from the button. Instead of 30% from the cutoff, maybe 25% from the cutoff. Same thing, small blind, maybe crank it down to 25% or so instead of 30%. So that's sort of the like a small adjustment, 4 to 5% less hands. Overall. So instead of, what I normally kind of end up with is like some sort of 27, 25, 22 game, maybe like a 21-20 is more optimal. Just because of the rake and how expensive it is at these levels. So yeah, that's that. And then the other thing is if you are playing a tighter range, I guess this is sort of what I was getting to in the first place, what's going on, Ehud? Yeah, I have actually. The bankroll I have on here was Ehud just asked, have you tried building a bankroll from a free tourney? And anyone who hasn't seen my montage of free sit and go should check that out. That's on my YouTube channel somewhere. But yeah, it shows me playing like hundreds of free step sit and goes. And yes, it is possible to build a bankroll from free tourneys, but not very fun, and I kind of gave up on it, honestly. But it could be done, and I could have done it, but I think I think YouTube was getting a little impatient and just wanted to see some regular poker. I don't know if you were. I think you were around when I was doing those, right, Ed?
Yes, I did see those in the. Oh, sorry, I've got the. I was just checking the YouTube thing, and now I'm getting the audio from that.
Yeah.
But yes, I did watch those, and the. It's. I mean, it's definitely interesting, especially like to the micro stakes players who are starting out to try to see like how do you start from nothing or start at the very bottom.
Your mic just did something weird again. Now it's back.
Okay.
I don't
I'm
know
not
what it
sure.
was.
I'm not sure how much of any of that went through, but it's kind of frustrating, like for players who are starting out and you're trying to follow stuff on YouTube, and a lot of the obviously like a lot of the people who are doing videos are trying to move up as quickly as possible, and they quickly move out of the stakes, like the very smallest levels, and it just seems like all of a sudden they're playing 50 and L. Because
Yeah, your mic
it's
is still cutting out and doing weird things. I'm not really sure what's going on. It sounds like it's like maybe the connection's loose, or is like there a. It almost sounds like a headphone jack that's like halfway plugged in or something.
Shouldn't be, but the other end of this is a ways away, but I will check, so hang on and carry on.
All
I'll be
right.
back.
Um, yeah. So for those of you guys that maybe couldn't hear, Ed was saying that like it is interesting because a lot of people do. And I'm gonna say that's off screen. Never mind. Kind of what I did is I showed some games where I was trying to show like, hey, this is what the free tournaments look like. This is sort of what you can do, and I ended up not really going into a ton of strategy about them because they're free, and honestly, the biggest strategy is like, I think I kind of went over it as just like play tight and. Try to move up as quickly as possible. I might go back and play some of those and just show like a little bit. See, the problem is I don't like teaching stuff if I don't feel that I'm competent, like very competent at it, and I'm not like I know how to play sit and goes. I kind of know the basic strategy, but I'm certainly not a sit and go player. So I wouldn't be giving like the perfect correct advice, which I guess I'm never really giving the perfect correct advice, so I probably shouldn't get too worried about that. But the I could definitely go back and talk about that a little bit, but well, no, sorry, I'm gonna quickly respond to a Twitch comment that I just saw about somebody said that you want to cut down your range from the from the worst positions. That's you want to cut down your range evenly across all positions. So if you don't want to get your ranges so that they don't so that they're not correctly distributed. So you don't want to all of a sudden be playing like a huge amount on the button and not at all under the gun, or much less from the middle position and early position, but not at all from the small blind. You want kind of a gradual. It ends up being kind of a non-gradual increase because you do play a lot more hands once you get to the button, but you don't want to. You don't want to have your ranges like just all of a sudden huge in one spot. And the other thing is, the button is where your weakest range is going to be. So that's sort of one position that you can easily tighten up to not be getting into so many post-flop spots with marginal holdings. And I'll call a shove from this guy if he shoves. Sevens is good enough to get it in against his range, whatever that may be. And then I'm not going to play three-handed here for the show. Ed, are you back? Did you figure anything out? No, not yet. Okay. So, yeah, I do have a lot of like very low stakes stuff, but not a ton of it. The issue is that like a lot of people, a lot of people want to see different things, and that's cool. I have no issue going back and making like 4 no limit videos. Like that's no problem. So I can always go and do that, and that's fine. But you know, what Ed said is true. Like I did want to move up kind of quickly so that I had a larger breadth of content. Because there are people, you know, there are people that come on Twitch, and even when I'm playing like 50 no limit or whatever, or I'll, you know, randomly jump in a game of 100 no limit over on Bovada, just kind of because I can, and people will still kind of be like, oh, why are you playing so low? So, you know, people want to see different things, and I try to have a large breadth of content, but I also kind of feel not. Is this the same guy that did this earlier? This weird kind of thing. Man, a 4 is a straight here.
I think it is.
Yeah. Should probably take a note on that guy. I'm not sure what note to take. And your mic sounds mostly better, I think.
All right. Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I couldn't see anything with the cable.
Yeah, it's just sort of crackling every now and then. So, I'm not sure. I'll call here on the button with Queen Jack suited. And I gotta make some kind of note on this guy. I'm not really sure what to write. You know, bets 2 streets as bluff and bets small on river with air. Like, wow, this is a pretty strong hand. I guess I've got position here, so I'm gonna be more likely to call. I think that having a pretty wide calling range on the button is probably better at post flop in spots like this. And then, you know, if I can ever take it away here, obviously I want to since I have queen high. So I'm gonna go ahead and bet out, and I'll bet pretty large. That way, I can bet large on the river also, either, you know, as a bluff if I want, or for value. Honestly, I think bluffing here, depending on, you know, who calls, is probably a bad idea. And I hit the river so often that I'm not going to have too many bluffs by the time I get to the river. But that's kind of what you want to think. Like, you want to think when you're betting the turn, you want to be thinking about, okay, what, like, the bet on the turn's easy, you know, but you need to be kind of thinking, what am I going to do on the next street? Obviously, if somebody raised me on the turn, I'm probably just going to shove and get it in because I've got, like, a lot of equity. I mean, that may be bad because I probably don't have enough EV there for, like, between pot equity and fold equity to for that to be great, but I've got too much money in the pot, and too much of the pot belongs to me to fold at that point, so I might as well put the money in while I still have all those outs, if that makes sense. It's like, it's probably not a great situation, but because the pot's so big, you can't really fold at that point. Yeah, so kind of jumped all over the place there. I don't know, did I miss anything that we're talking about?
Well, I was kind of wondering with that hand, like if you wouldn't want to push a little bit on the flop because your draw is so huge, and if the money goes in there, then you're going to get both cards. So I don't know if that's.
Well, yes, but one thing that, and that's kind of how I would normally think about it, but one thing that I've kind of sort of had some light shed on is that, like, you know, the equity differences on the flop aren't that significant. Like, you know, getting it in there with your set or your flush draw, it's like, it's not a huge difference, I guess. You know, there is obviously a difference, but you're not going to play them that different. So in spots like that, it doesn't matter too much. Whereas if you're going to be I'm just going to fold the sevens. Whereas if you're going to, you know, use your position well, then, you know, somebody else could get it in there with like some sort of other straight draw or other flush draw, and then, you know, you get it in with this kind of like sort of whatever equity you have, which is fine. It's not like that's necessarily minus EV. But if you can call and then play the turn, you know, in the most profitable way, then that's probably going to be better. Like, if the more you think about it, and this is something I think Ed Miller said in one of his videos, is that he really likes getting to the river because he feels like by the river he knows what to do a lot better than his opponents, which is kind of like one of those things. It's sort of like, you know, if you're three barreling somebody might get it in on the flop there with, a pair of like top pair, top kicker or whatever, on the on that flush draw flop, and they wouldn't be wrong, especially against my hand. It'd be like kind of a toss up. But if I, call there, bet the turn, and then jam the river when I miss, it's going to be really tough for them to call with top pair. And then at the same time, like if they're like, okay, well this guy's got so many draws and some of the draws missed, and then he calls and he's wrong, and I actually have the hand, then he's lost this huge pot with top pair. The whole idea is that you put him in a really tough spot by the river, and you aren't going to be able to do that as well by just raising the flop and kind of because people are pretty comfortable with what to get it in with on the flop and what not to, but as you kind of get to the turn in the river, people become less comfortable and less. They don't know what to do with the middle of their range, kind of the further down you get. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah,
a little bit.
That makes sense.
Somewhat.
Well, and also by just calling him, you get a cheap look at the turn, to see, because you could hit, one of your draws right there, which of course would make it a lot easier to play going forward.
Yeah. Right, and then it's just I think it's just one of those things about sort of using your position well is kind of what it comes down to, and by kind of raising and lowering the stack to pot ratio, you're negating your positional advantage to some extent. So here, I've got like the gut shot, overcard, backdoor flush draw. I'm in middle position. My range is pretty wide, so I'm going to tend to bet a little bit bigger on the flop so that I can barrel more. Got the raise in finally. Also, really interesting concept. I know that you don't have a Deuces Cracked membership, but there was a pretty interesting video on I don't know, I don't think it was from the other day, but it was something that was referenced, and it was kind of about how bet sizes work as you go, street to street. And I talked about it in the forum a little bit on one post, but it was sort of just a caveat at the end of one of the posts I wrote. But it sort of talks about how your opponent really has to, they really have to tighten up if you're going to be betting large across 3 streets, and that's kind of a given. But what you don't really notice is that it's trying to think how to explain this, or if I even want to try to explain it, because it's one of those concepts that I understand it when somebody draws it out, but it's a little bit harder for me to quite wrap my head around enough to explain, which I really like. One of the things that I like about doing this is it forces me to learn stuff very, very well, because to be able to explain it or defend something, you have to know it really, really well. And that's one of the reasons with the I don't know if I talked about it last show, but the book study club that we're kind of doing over on Rounder University is I think going to be really good, because it's going to force not only me but the people involved to kind of cement a lot of the basic knowledge about poker, and we're going to be kind of cementing the topics before we move on to something else. One thing that I've always maybe not struggled with, but I don't know what to taken for granted, whatever it is just basic pot odds, equity, card combinations, trying to figure out what combinations of hands I'm up against. Typically on a flop I say, okay, this guy's got flush draws, pairs, rattle off a couple things. It's kind of interesting. There's a couple diamonds that are ahead of me, but at the same time, I doubt he'd bet out pot with I don't know. Ugh.
He doesn't have much behind, really.
Yeah, that's it's just one of those spots where if a fourth diamond comes, the jig's up. He's not gonna. This guy might, but he shouldn't be putting a whole lot of money into the pot. And then there's 2 diamonds out there that have me beat. There's made flushes. my straight, may or may not be good when it hits because of the diamond. So it's just a kind of a nasty spot. So anyway, yeah, I think that'll be one of the things that'll help with the book club, is just sort of cementing a lot of foundational ideas. Because one thing like counting out, counting combinations. I've caught myself before talking in videos saying, I can have this and this and this, and then I go back and watch it, or I kind of think about it and I realize like, oh, I just that's 7 combinations of hands that I just based that play off of. I just sort of that's not a good card.
He seems to have gotten a lot more aggressive with his bet sizing.
Yeah.
And he still doesn't have anything.
It is, that's okay. So this is a perfect example of when you clearly, like, I've clearly switched from what, again, my kind of shitty, not really understanding, best guess at game theory optimal play to exploitative play. Calling twice there and then checking behind is probably pretty exploitative. But because I've seen this guy do this, I think 4 times now, 3 or 4 times now, it's that's when you finally, like, once you actually have a read on someone, that's when you adjust your play. You don't just sort of look at somebody's stats and say, oh, this guy's playing this way, I need to adjust in this way. You need to actually have like a no kidding solid read before you just start adjusting how you're going to play against someone. So when this guy triple barrels, maybe he has something. Or maybe he would, check back the flop with a lot of hands, or things like that. We don't really know exactly. We just know that, the way he's handling this is that's how he's handling his air. So it's kind of interesting. So yeah, I'm not going to try to jump into the topic of like 3-barreling, but the basic gist is sort of that when you look at your value hands to your bluffs. I don't know if like when this is another one of those things that kind of should be like this basic ingrained knowledge, but pretty much any time you should be able to look at the pot and kind of know, okay, like how often does this person need to fold? I talk about it in my bluffing video with different bet sizes. Like, a full pot size bet, the guy needs to fold, I think 30% of the time for it to be profitable. Like 33, like a third, right? Or is it? See, this is why
I think it's a third.
Yeah. So like just knowing all that stuff instantly is almost like it's almost like this thing where really until you know it like cold, it should be something that you're like looking at with note cards throughout the day. Like I've actually considered and plan on actually making a few note cards with like I've thought of a few different ways to do it, and I'd love to somehow integrate it into my site, but having different flops and different hands, and then ask a question. Okay, how many combinations of hands beat me? And then kind of get more advanced. It's like, okay, these are your you're raising from the cutoff. This is your cutoff range. How does this hit your hand? It's kind of like being able to do Flopzilla, which is a program that kind of looks at the strength of your range on different flops, but in your head quickly. For different situations. I think players with tons and tons of experience just sort of know and have sort of a natural understanding of it, but they still get it wrong a lot because, like, I get it wrong when I say, oh, I can have this and this and this, so it sort of makes sense for me to go and bet, and then I look back at it and I'm like, well, that didn't really make sense because I wouldn't have had those hands, and there's only 3 combinations of this hand, so what was I thinking? I just like you kind of might make stuff up in your head if you don't know it cold. So anyway, that's a lot of kind of what I want to work on before moving forward with my personal poker learning, because I think that having a solid handle on those will allow me to bring in a lot of new stuff to understand better once you actually get the fundamentals like completely down. Like, a lot of people say, "Oh, you just need to work on the fundamentals," and "Oh, you just need to play ABC poker. You just need to get better at the fundamentals." But they don't really like. Sometimes it's like, "Oh, that's like pre-flop. That's standard lines." But really, like the way I've kind of figured out that the fundamentals is really just math. Um, when it comes down to it, fundamentals is hand combinations, pot equity, fold equity, EV calculations. That's the fundamentals. Um, Maybe a little bit of understanding ranges, and so that's what I think the first step of becoming a good poker player is. And the nice thing about those things is that they apply to all games. Those apply to sit and goes, cash games, tournaments, heads up, six max, full ring. Those are like literally just very very basic concepts. That there's no, how many outs you have and trying to figure out your fold equity plus your pot equity, which turns into your expected value. That's true across any game. I think actually, like the first time I saw an EV calculation was in Dan Harrington's book, Harrington on Hold'em. I remember looking at it and being like, "What? Like, this is what poker players are thinking about? Like, you got to be kidding!" That just kind of blew my mind when I saw it, like 10 years ago.
My first impression of that when I saw it was, this explains why the pros are so much better than me or the amateurs or whatever, because whenever you run into a new concept, even if it's not like say new to poker but new to you, it's, I don't know, it's usually like very eye opening when you're like, oh, that's what the good players do.
Right.
And then you keep trying to add stuff to like your own toolkit to do.
Yeah.
I have a lot of trouble, like trying to put players on ranges, and I don't know if that's because I'm really bad at it or if it's because I play 5NL and it's very difficult to put people on ranges because you really just don't know what they could be doing.
Right, and that's kind of why I keep saying, pretty much to try and not do that as much. Against 4 players, I mean, one of these guys has got to have an ace, right? I mean, that's just, it's really rare for for low stakes players not to call it. Now I'm not as sure that they have an ace, so I'll probably just check call down to the river. I don't think there's a ton of value in betting here, because just I'm kind of in the middle of my range, and I've got a great bluff catcher if somebody wants to take a stab at this. I'm only worried about a king or somebody spiking a set, so I'm just going to call down. This seems reasonable, right?
I think so.
I mean, I might take
I don't
one
think
shot at the river, but I don't see. I just don't know if there's any value in doing that. I would never bluff here, but I guess it could help my red line. Is that enough motivation to bet? The thing that would really suck is if somebody like called with, King Jack. But oh well. Yeah, somebody mentioned, having discipline as a poker player. Like, that's definitely, yeah. I mean, obviously, that's a huge, huge thing. But you have to actually know what the right plays are, or you got to learn how you're supposed to play before you can even start, tilting and playing how you're not supposed to play. But yeah, once you understand the concepts and once you know how to play correctly, one of the biggest challenges for people can be tilt and the mental game. One thing though is I think that the more you understand how the game works and the math of the game, and the more it's like kind of part of the fundamental understanding of how the game works. At least for me, and a tilt is like just vastly different for everybody, but for me, like, it really helps me. Like when I, triple barrel or whatever and run into like, the absolute top of somebody's range. Like, as long as I understand exactly how they should be like, the more I understand how their range should be constructed, the less it bothers me. You know, the more I understand how, like, things, like, correct play, then I really don't get bothered when I see incorrect. Immediately know, like, okay, perfect. Now I know exactly how to adjust. The guy leaves the table, like, oh well. Like, you know, you just kind of, as long as you know, like, how you're supposed to be playing, and you know, you can learn something by the way somebody else is playing, and sometimes you can't. You know, like when we were playing last week, we had that, you know, eights versus queens hand, and it's like, well, you know, maybe, like, we don't really know. You know, it's hard to really learn anything from a hand like that, because you know, the fact that we ran into queens doesn't necessarily mean that we made a bad play. It's very hard for shoving eights, you know, for you know, to be like a terrible play. Like, we have to have a very specific read on an opponent, and on Bovada you almost never have that, so it's kind of tough.
Now, I don't know, on the Bovada, it tends to vary kind of widely between, you know, the people who are, you know, either shoving or calling shoves with only, like, you know, the very, very best hands. And then you have other guys who, you know, put it in with ace nine off suit.
Right. Yeah, and
So
that's
it's,
and that's why it's so important to not necessarily try and read hands, because again, you know, it's so hard to know. Like, you're never going to know exactly what somebody's range is. You might know some of their tendencies, and that's fine. Like, once you understand their tendencies, you can maybe adjust a little bit. But you know, to almost any extent, you're not going to accurately know what their range is. And even if you know exactly what their range is, like, does that necessarily mean you know how to exploit it better? Maybe, maybe not. But I've found that, yes, I can generally read hands pretty well, and yes, I can get kind of pretty close, but you need to be very, very confident about two different things. You need to be confident about your read, and you need to be confident about how they're going to react to it. I mean, you've seen a lot of my videos. I'm sure you remember, or you can at least kind of know, that there are a lot of times where I've been like, I think this guy has this hand, so I go and I say, I think this guy has this hand, and I think he should fold it if I bet this amount. And then I bet that amount, and he calls, and he has that hand. And it's like, okay,
yep.
well, all right, cool. I feel good because I got my read correct, but he didn't do what I wanted him to do. Well, that's because we don't control what the other players do. We don't control what their actual range is, and we don't control how they actually behave with it. So we just need to kind of construct our range in a way that makes it so that whatever they're doing is, if they vary, you know, one way or the other, and if that guy's calling with that hand, and I think that is a hand he should be folding, or, you know, that he, let's see, probably gonna bet a few streets here with this ace jack. What did this guy limp and I raised? Or did I 3-bet? I don't really see it.
I'm not sure.
It must be a 3-bet.
Based on the pot size, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not going to call here. That's fine. So, yeah, I mean, that's, you know, when you see a guy call down light, it's not a big deal as long as you had your range constructed well. If your range was full of bluffs, and that's something that I kind of worry about myself doing, is having too many bluffs in my range. So it's something I need to look into and be careful about, because, you know, if somebody calls you down really light and your range was full of a ton of bluffs, well, no, you didn't, you know, you let them kind of accidentally exploit you. So, you know, they may or may not have been trying to, probably not, but because you had an unbalanced range that had too many bluffs in it, well, now, like, you just pretty much made them look like an awesome player, because you weren't really playing in a way that was optimal. This guy's min raising, so I kind of want to raise a little bit bigger than I normally would, than 3x. We're also slightly deep, so I want to make my 3-bets a little bit bigger when we're deep. And And so here, like, I mean, I happen to, like, if this was an 8 or a deuce or a lot of other hands, like, I'd probably stop betting, but because I turned a gut shot, I obviously want to keep betting because I've got outs. For sure, I've got at least, tens. It's hard for him to call, like, if he doesn't have an ace. I mean, it's just, you put a lot of pressure on people, and they end up folding. Like, if he has an ace, no, he's not going to fold, but his range isn't 100% aces just because he called a flop c-bet. But I don't know. Does the
he
whole
might
thing
fold
about,
ace rag too.
yeah, it's possible. I don't know that many players are going to be folding ace rag even to 2 bets. Does the whole thing about kind of like the player varying his range, like letting him kind of be the one to decide if he wants to call too tight or too loose, and sort of playing your range for your range in a standard way? Does that kind of make sense for the most part?
I think so. I mean, what I was thinking about also, like what you were talking about, like how you put a player on the hand, and so your read there is good. But I was kind of thinking that, well, you have a good read on his range, you don't necessarily have a good read on the player yet. And when he calls when he's not supposed to, it does help you in the future on your read for him that you'll know, that he's harder to push off or that he's going to call with third pair or, whatever his call indicated. And so I think over time you kind of pick up on both ends where, you already had his range pinned down pretty good and you start to learn about his actions. I mean, you can't control them, but you do get an indication of how he's going to play there and, if that kind of play is going to work against him.
Right, and your mic broke up a little bit, so I'll kind of repeat what you said so that people can hear it. What Ed was saying was, sort of that it does kind of make sense that even if you know what the guy's range is, it doesn't mean that you know how he plays it. So, you really do. You have to have seen some indication of how the person is playing and what their range is before you can really adjust, accurately. And that's true to some extent. If you know that a player is playing a given range, you can exploit them by playing a certain way, based on the fact that they may be playing like too many hands. But like here's an example. I'll give you an example of a mistake that I think a lot of players make that I used to make. I maybe still make it. Yeah. For one, you'll notice that I don't have a ton of stats on my HUD because I just in general assume that I don't have enough stats on players. And then not only that, the stats just don't give you a full picture. I honestly think that using a HUD probably like hurt my game a lot in the past. I do think there is a lot of value once you understand all the fundamentals, once you understand how sort of your standard strategy looks and how players can play best against your strategy, and then once you know how to adjust players based on what they're doing, then I think you can actually use the stats. But a quick example is talking about a stat like, fold to c-bet. People will look at somebody's fold to c-bet and say, oh, their fold to c-bet is high, so I want a c-bet. Or their fold to c-bet is low, meaning, they don't fold to a lot of c-bets. So when you see that, take like a guy who's playing like 45% of hands. You see this all the time if you ever play with guys who play 45% of hands. I don't, but if you do, then you'll see it. So you look and you say, okay, the guy's playing 45% of hands. He doesn't fold to c-bets. Okay, his fold to c-bet's low. I have air, so I don't want to bet. When really, his fold to c-bet could be low. His fold to turn bet could be low. What does that mean? It means that he's getting to the river with a bunch of air. So the best way to exploit that player is to bet, 3 streets with almost your entire range. And if all you do is look at his fold to c-bet stat, you're not going to do that very well. You're not going to know that accurately. I'm going to bet here. I think just on a hand reading sort of thing, I think this guy has an 8 or some small pair, or maybe some sort of straight draw. Obviously, I'm going to fold now. Pretty blatant, but oh well. I want to say that guy's been in here before making random comments. So yeah, that's sort of got distracted. How do you make somebody a mod? I don't really know how to make somebody a mod. I know I've done it before. More settings. Let me see if it's in there. I've got a couple banned chatters. I don't know why.
Probably the same thing.
What, I probably did accidentally because I have no idea how to do a lot of this stuff. How do I create a mod? Somebody in the chat's gonna know. They'll answer me in like 60 seconds or so. Because I always end up accidentally. This guy's 3-betting. He's only got a 6% 3-bet. I'm just going to fold with King 9. It's a good, and this one obviously he's giving me great pot odds to call, so I'm not going to fold to a min 3-bet.
Now, like, what's your plan on table 2?
What did he 3-bet small? He probably doesn't have a very strong range. I guess
Yeah.
I'll just bet. I'm sorry. I mean, he probably has a pretty tight range, and that doesn't hit a lot of it. Again, that's sort of just like, that's probably a little bit like on the exploitative side.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that he would 3-bet pre-flop and then not at least stab at that flop.
Yeah,
I mean,
you would think so.
I mean, what does he think? What would he be thinking that you open and then call a 3-bet with that's going to get anywhere near that? I mean, I don't know. He really kind of gives up his only chance there.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so it's not it's not labeled mod, it's labeled OP, like you're making the person overpowered, which I guess makes sense. But that's why I was like, what is OP? Is that original poster, overpowered, like what? So, oh well. Oops, I wanted to make that pot. I was making all my raise sizes pot now. Yeah, it's and that's the thing is like, and that's one of the nice things is you can kind of just sort of like, there's a lot of situations where people just show up with random stuff. People do random things. There is no real good way to explain it. Like, I mean, I do it fairly often. I make random like spew or just make some play that was terrible because I wasn't thinking correctly. I don't think I've been doing it as much lately, but I've certainly done it in the past. So, if that, if that happens to me, then that happens to other people. So trying to be like, oh, he's always going to have this range, or he's, this is how he's going to play, doesn't really make sense because there's no way of knowing. I think we were, a few weeks ago, I was having this discussion with Shark, and, I was just saying, like, I can't force anybody to do anything. Like, if the call button's there, they have every right to click it. It may be very bad for them to click it, and that's fine. As long as I play a certain way, then I don't care if they click it or not. And that's kind of a nice way to be able to think about it. Like, not being stressed, oh God, I hope this guy folds, I hope this guy folds. Being able to kind of say like, well, I don't really care if he calls or folds. If he calls, he's calling he's calling too loose, and he's going to get exploited by the value part of my range. And if he folds, great, he's folding too much, and that's how he's going to lose money. So this guy checks. I wonder if that means he has a hand. Since he always bets when he has nothing. Nope, he's just giving up.
I don't think that's the same guy that you were taking the notes on before.
Yeah, because he doesn't have a note, so that's probably a good point.
It looks like a different screen name.
Is it? Oh.
Raul had said in the chat before that maybe that guy misclicked when he min 3-bet you.
What's that?
Rello was saying in the chat maybe the guy misclicked when he min 3-bet you.
Oh. Yeah.
On the hand we took away on the flop.
Yep, that's another thing in like especially online poker, like, you know, people can misclick. People can, you know, someone else could be playing on their screen name, you know, the cat could walk across their keyboard. Like, you know, it's just like all, you know, like, yeah, that's a very low percentage stuff, but you just don't know. And so trying to like you know, there you do know, well, you can get to the point, you can study a point where you know that to all your research and everything you've looked at, you have like a very solid strategy that's very hard to exploit. Excuse me for a second, my dog is trying to dig its way out of its cage. Not that the door's closed. Oh, what are you doing in there? Get out. Stay out of your box. Here, play with those things. All right. Yeah, so, you know, and it's, some of it's kind of basic, you know, some of it is just like, okay, well, you have to have, you know, if you make pot-sized bets, you know, if you're going to make a pot-sized bet, you know, and we know that a pot-sized bet for your fold equity to make money, he needs to fold a third of the time. Or, yeah, he needs to fold a third of the time, right? So if he's folding a third, that means that you should have value 2/3 of the time. So there you go. Your value range should be 2-1 against your, you know, you should have two value hands for every one bluff for a pot size bet. Then you just need to somehow build in your checking range. You need to somehow build in the next street where you have that same 2-1, and then that river where you have that same 2-1. So somehow you have to, like, you know, the number of things you need to bet on the flop for value probably needs to be more than you bet on the turn. And this is all kind of normal. Sort of, you know, you bet a lot on the flop, and then typically people are tighter on the turn and even tighter on the river, which makes sense. You know, as you get further down, like, your value range becomes stronger, and your bluffs, you know, some of your bluffs go away and everything else. So you kind of, you know, if you follow that general rule, and then, you know, the more you think about it, the more you kind of play with it, the easier it becomes to understand. Like, you know, I've started to finally understand the idea of betting bigger with a wider range, because it gives your opponent worse odds. And if you have a wider range, you don't want them to be able to call as much. So with too wide range, you actually want bigger bets, because it makes it much harder for them to call with a big part of their range. And it's hard, like, you kind of might find it hard to bet with a wide part of your range and betting big. But it's just, once you sort of like understand it, you kind of can just do it and not think about it as much, I guess. I don't know, kind of rambling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good sized adjustment to start building a pretty big pot without any hand, or without like a significant hand. I mean, it's something, you know, like when I watch your videos, it's like, and I watch you barrel, I keep thinking, you know, like, you know, now what's going to happen, kind of thing. And certainly a lot of times it works. Other times, of course, you run into the wrong hand. But that's something, you know, that I'm trying to work on in my game, is to try to be more aggressive and to push harder and to put the pressure on them. But I mean, I don't play as well if I don't have any cards, which of course makes me a pretty weak poker player. and it's certainly something I'm trying to work on.
Right, and you should think of one thing that might help is try not to think of your hand as a made hand or a bluff. Try to think of it in terms of equity. And somebody in Twitch, hey, it's Clay, mentioned a really good point, which is not to just think in terms of hands, but into in terms of your the actual combinations, which is a good point. Like if you have and I've definitely had this happen where I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna barrel my aces, kings, and queens and my sets, and so I can like barrel my my gut shots and all my air because I've got this hand is air and this hand is aces and this air is this air hand and this king's hand. Well, that's not really true because aces, kings, and queens probably makes up like depending on what hand you have is going to make up 6 times 3. So like there's 18 combos, and then your jack 7 suited is 4 combos, and your random king 10 offsuit is 16, and all of a sudden you've got more air than you have value. Not a great example, but you get the point. There's a lot more air than there are aces, kings, and queens, so you need to keep that in mind with combos. But if you think about it in terms of equity, like barreling a gut shot, I never used to really do because I'm like, man, I very rarely hit that. But when you add that into the fact that you're also doing it with your top pair, top kicker, you're also doing it with your sets, you're also doing it with your open-ended straight draws, and when you get to the river, you've got the choice as to whether you put in the last huge bet or not. And that's kind of one of the key things is that if you are in more control of that last big bet, then that's a huge advantage. If you're comfortable playing that last big bet and your opponent isn't, then you are going to make a lot less mistakes than them. So as long as you get to the river with a good range of value to bluffs, then you don't really need to worry about what part of their range they showed up with. If they just showed up with their whole value range, that's not going to happen often. And so that's fine because they folded too much previously. Like even if you say like, oh, well, that guy's tight, so you shouldn't have barreled him, or you think kind of like, oh, this guy's really tight, I shouldn't barrel him. Well, that just means he's going to fold a lot more. If the guy's really loose and he's calling down a lot of people will say, oh, this guy's loose, you don't want to bluff him. Well, he may call the flop, he may call the turn, but is he really going to call with third pair, to a full pot river bet, for like 2/3 of a stack? Maybe he does. And then, okay, you take a note. Like, okay, this is good to know. This guy is calling down way too light. He's calling down with the very bottom of his range too much. I just need to adjust my hand to more value. And you don't necessarily, like, depending on the player, you may change it to, I think the analogy is always, if you're playing rock, paper, scissors, and the guy is, throwing 80% rock and 20% scissor, well, you're just going to do 100% paper. You don't worry about the 20% scissor. You just go 100% paper the whole time. And that's kind of what you do. If the guy's going to call down with the very bottom of his range, you just go all value, like 100% value. I don't know what to do here. Like, I always bet here, and they always fold. And this guy's pretty aggressive.
I would still bet, but
yeah, I'll just bet half pot.
Oh,
because I mean, 3
because
bet
of course
pots.
you're,
Just gonna bet, half pot. Anyway.
ideally he has something he can call with, and
So and here's the
now
hard
bet
part
some
is
more.
like, what part of my non-value range do I double barrel here? Like, there's really not. I guess draws. Some draws I might barrel again. Because I've got top set here, which is easy. But what would I do with 9-10? If I went 3
Well,
bet.
now you
9.
got a vote.
Right, I know that, but I don't know what I would do with like 9-10 here. I don't know what I would do with king queen. I know I would barrel. So I guess if I barrel king queen, I need to barrel top set. It's always tough. Like when you know that they can't have much because you have the entire board. The second seven actually I thought was a pretty good card. Figured if he called with anything, maybe he might have some piece of that. But that's fine. Also, the other thing is I just won. I don't know what's 9 divided by like 5. 9 times like 45 big blinds. I mean that's pretty good. Yeah, that's a big hand. That's a lot of blinds.
Yep.
So, man, it looks like people just don't. How's the quality on YouTube versus Twitch? It looks like everybody's over on Twitch, even though I like it better when people are on YouTube. Is the quality same, different? I know YouTube sometimes has a slightly longer delay.
Yeah, you're just pulling the pot in from the Queen's hand on YouTube, but the video quality looks good.
Okay, that's good. That makes for the easy upload. Yeah, I'm working on a not a software, but I'm writing some articles. Got a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw. It's a pretty good card. If he checks, I'll definitely bet. If he bets, I could raise here sometimes. It's tough for him to have much of anything that he wants to call with. And I've got outs, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of make a smallish raise. What's 280? Just make it a little bit bigger than double. Should have made it a little bigger than that, maybe. But I mean, like, just kind of put yourself in his shoes. Like, what do you do with ace 9 here? I mean, you probably call, maybe, but it's just it's a crappy spot. Anything worse than ace 9, which ace 9 is kind of like a pretty strong part of that. Like, that's a pretty good hand on that flop. Right. Well, see, that's the thing is like Ed can kind of attest to this. Do players always, when you say you don't need to worry about balance, in what way? That not worrying about balance implies you know exactly how every opponent plays, or you know exactly how to exploit every other opponent. So, somebody in the chat mentioned you don't need to worry about balance till 100 NL plus, but it's not really about worrying about like balance for the sake of the other players. It's more about worrying about you not knowing how to exploit people necessarily. Like you can say yes in general, low stakes players call too much, but I bluff a lot of people off of hands by going 3 streets. I mean, there's the whole what's a bluff and what's for value type of discussion, but in general, I mean, my red line goes up. Nice. I'm glad to hear it. Rello in the chat just mentioned that I've got I wrote an article a while ago about poker concentration, and it's helped him out a lot, so that's good to hear. I'm glad. But the balance isn't really for your opponents because you think your opponents are going to be able to your opponents are going to be able to exploit you. It's because you don't necessarily know how your opponents are playing exploitably. If you know that the guy's just calling down with third pair every hand, then yes, that's very simple. You go 100% paper and no rock or whatever. That's how you exploit that guy. You go straight value and nothing else. But if he's calling 2 streets with second pair and then folding to the river, then that's not the best strategy to exploit him. And until you actually know, which it's not easy to know that, it's very, very difficult to know if a guy is calling all 3 streets light or just calling the flop and the turn light or just, randomly raising a bunch of turns. You don't really know what a player is doing until you've actually seen some evidence. So as a basic strategy, you kind of still do need to have that that basic way of playing that is near unexploitable. Again, there could be some sort of population reads, and like maybe you even adjust a little bit because the rake is incredibly expensive, so you play a little bit tighter than you normally would. But the balance isn't really because your opponents are going to be exploiting you. The balance is so you don't exploit yourself against unknown opponents. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I think that people tend to shy away from using balance at low stakes because like players aren't adjusting, players aren't making reads on you, but that doesn't even matter compared to the fact that you may not know how to unbalance appropriately. Anything?
No, I think that makes sense because I think, what Hey It's Clay is saying, and generally the way that I would look at it, is that at the micro stakes level, a lot of the players aren't even paying attention, let alone, making adjustments against, your style of play. So like it doesn't seem to make sense to adjust because of the other players, but the point you're bringing up is different than that. That you're adjusting more to protect yourself, but not so much against them.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty much me admitting that against a guy that I have, it's a lot of these guys I'm getting a few hands on, so there's not a lot of great examples. But even 70 hands, like this guy playing 2016, this guy looks like just standard tag. Against standard tag, Chia. I don't know how to exploit this guy. He's playing 2016. It's reasonable. He's 3-betting 8%. Nothing to exploit there. Aggression factor 4. Okay. Not enough hands to tell if he's like got some weird raise flop thing going or anything like that. I don't know how to exploit this guy. So I'm going to play in a way that I think is unexploitable. Again, it's something that I'm developing. I'm not going to say that, I'll just play unexploitably against him. If I could, I'd probably be at much higher stakes. But I'm going to do my best to play unexploitably. And if I see something that tells me, definitively, either, he shows up with, there's a lot of, things that are kind of out in left field that can give stuff away. But, like we've talked about before, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't give anything away. It's like, okay, I 3-bet and he 4-bets and I jam and he calls and he has ace-king or aces or kings or queens. It's like, okay, I didn't learn anything. If he has jack-7 offsuit, okay, I've learned a lot. But until that happens, there's no adjustment that I can really make until something like that happens. I'm not going to call here out of position. So against most players, you don't have any adjustment to make. A guy like even this guy, he's played 100 hands. He's 3-betting 25%, playing 38-25. I've probably had 95 hand runs where I've played like this. Is he a little bit aggressive and a little bit crazy? Maybe, but he just showed up with the nuts. So, we don't know that for sure. What's this guy doing with 8-king suited? What? Look at these two. Wow, that was great timing. So look at these two players. You've got the standard tag, who's playing 22-19 with a 4.5 3-bet, and you've got the crazy guy 3-betting 28%, playing 38-33, and who just showed up with the reasonable hand. The tag. I don't know exactly how this happened. I'm sure you guys in the chat kind of were watching a little closer than I was, but somehow, some way, this guy bet. I guess this guy just decided to bluff shove the turn, repping like a flush or whatever, and this guy called because he had the flush. So this guy bet and he called and then he jammed and it didn't work out for him. So you think, okay, this guy's kind of crazy and he's the one that shows up with the nuts, and this guy shows up bluffing with pretty much air. That bluff doesn't really make a lot of sense. He doesn't have any equity in that pot. He had no outs. Making a huge, just complete bluff there with no outs is probably not a great idea. You generally want to have some kind of outs, some kind of equity. You don't want to be making big plays like that with no equity. So it looks like this player might have some stuff that we may or may not be able to exploit based off of that. Not a huge amount, but okay, this guy calls with flushes. Like that doesn't really tell us much. So that's a kind of nicely timed, pretty great example of of not trying to read people's ranges and not trying to say, well, this guy's a 21-17, so he's going to play ABC, he's going to play standard, he's not going to bluff it off with king high, and this guy's kind of crazy, and he left, but this guy's crazy, so it just doesn't, there's no point in trying to make generally exploitative plays if we don't know how we're exploiting people. The more I've kind of accepted that, the more I've seen examples of like perfect examples like that where even I think in the middle of the time when I was arguing with Shark on one of the other episodes, I said, did you put this guy on bottom pair? And he's like, no, that guy's an idiot. Like, what's he doing? It's like, exactly. I don't know. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know why. It doesn't really matter. But I know that if I play in this way, I catch that, and that guy gets exploited by me. If I try to adjust and either play more aggressive or less aggressive or for more value or less value, that guy may accidentally exploit me because he's playing like an idiot, and I don't know that, so I get exploited. Whereas if I try to play in a way that nobody's exploiting me, horrible mistakes are going to be really plus EV for me. And that's one of the nice things is that like when you're trying to play this kind of zero EV style, especially at low stakes where people are making lots of big mistakes, the further away from the way you're playing that they're playing, the more you're going to make because you're sort of in that middle, and the more they deviate, the more you make. So guys who are playing terrible, you're going to make a lot of money from anyway. It doesn't really, I don't know. I'm kind of beating it to death, but I don't know. It's something that I'm finally starting to understand a little better, and that's why I kind of like sharing it with you guys.
You see, I had always looked at the balancing as something that you would see at the higher stakes, where you have regs who have thousands of hands against each other, and and looking at it like that, and you'd say, well, yes, it would be very important in that situation, and thinking that it's not going to apply at the micros, but what you're talking about is like is different than that.
Right. And it's different. It's the same thing, but it's I guess for a different reason.
Right.
And yeah, those guys are going to try to play balanced because I guess they kind of know how each other's playing, but it kind of comes back to the same thing. It almost makes more sense that if you have no idea how somebody plays, how can you play? Why would you play anything but balanced? If you have no idea how to exploit somebody, why would you play in a way that you don't know if you're exploiting them or not? It doesn't really make sense to play in any other way until you actually know. Hold on. Okay. Oops, sorry. Hold on. Whoops. How do I... There we go. See if we can get Shark on this. Hey there. Shark? Oh great, this means it's my computer. Oh wow, my internet is stressing. Ed, you there?
I'm still here. I had a message on my screen that said I need like premium to share a screen on a conference call or a multiple call, but I do still have the screen.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's because he's not connected or not.
Yeah. No, it was just like crazy lag. Okay, yeah, that's not gonna work. I have a different account that's like I set up like a uRounder account, which was kind of stupid because it's no different. And I have the premium service on there because I can make free calls anywhere in the U.S. So I'll use that next time so that hopefully it's easier to do multi-way calls because I'd like to have like guests and stuff on a little bit more. Keeps things entertaining, but I also have to battle. Like if I do that, I can probably only stream on one platform and stuff like that. So I just need to kind of be aware of it, and maybe if I'm gonna have guests on and stuff, I only stream on one platform, and if I do the show by myself, I can stream on both or whatnot. Like I think the thing I do on Twitch. What's that?
Are you seeing Clay's comments in the chat?
No.
He's got a couple you should probably read before they scroll off if they do.
Okay. All right. So one of the comments is seen people flat draws and not range. You see people spazzing out with air, no equity, and you say that guy's crazy, so you can't put him on reverse range. So you bounce better.
Probably fold on table 1.
Yeah, I'm not sure. What's the what's he asking? I'm not really sure what the question is.
Well, I'm not entirely sure either. He was saying in his first comment, it says, you guys are a little confused about exploitative and balance. You have tons of reads on these guys right now, but you're not looking for the right things. You're looking at their stats. So I guess what he's saying is that, I don't know, you're paying too much attention to the stats and not how they're actually playing. But I don't really think that's the case.
Yeah. The audio was, I think the audio was kind of rough when we tried to add somebody to the call, but I think it's all right now. This is a guy that kind of spazzed out earlier with stuff. But I mean, he's only 3-betting 3.6%, and I don't really have any reads that other than that one time that he spazzed out over here with kind of bluffing the flop. What's that?
I said I'm half joking, but I don't think I've ever seen you fold 8s before.
Yeah. Well, it may not have been right, but I mean, I don't think calling is very good, even in position. I mean, calling a 3-bet trying to hit a set is going to be really tough. Yeah, I see that. I'm still not really sure what exactly that means. I mean, I think we are trying to adjust to the tendencies we see, but other than that, that's why I don't use a lot of stats, is because I think if you try to go off of stats too much, you end up making mistakes, which is sort of, I think, was my point, is that even if you see stats, that may be like one tendency, but that doesn't tell you the whole story. So I'm not sure which part. I'm not sure which part I was contradicting myself about. If you could elaborate, maybe we can kind of clean this up a little bit. Yeah, sorry. I don't even think it's very easy to find the dictionary on my site anymore. I used to have it like up there somewhere, but let me see if I can actually find it real quick for you. And it has some of the terminology. Yeah, we're kind of on the show we just sort of go for it. So it's not always we do kind of just speak in all the lingo. Let me find the dictionary. I'll link that for now. I gotta get it so that it's actually a little bit easier to get to, since I think it only shows up in like related posts right now. Yeah, it's just unexceptionalrounder.com/poker-dictionary. But let me. What is this? Okay. This should take you to it. I think, maybe. Yeah, that should.
And one of the commenters was asking if stats are cheating, but they're definitely not. The heads-up display, like with PokerCheck or Hold'em Manager, is fairly standard, and it's allowed by almost all the poker sites. Bovada is a notable exception. With their anonymous tables, you can't use a HUD or get stats.
Well, you can use a HUD, but only for the hands that you've actually been sitting there playing with them for.
That's right. I forgot about the Hold'em indicator.
Yeah.
For Bovada. So yeah, even that you can use a HUD to get stats for the session. But no, it's definitely not cheating. The poker sites are aware of the software and do not ask people or demand that people not use it. Recreational players tend to not like the HUD because they feel that the regulars and the more serious players are getting yet another advantage on them. But they can play with the HUD too. They just got to spend the money. I would describe myself as a recreational player, and I play with the HUD
Yeah, I think HUDs are relatively standard for most players. I'd still like to get this. Yeah, it's interesting. Just go ahead and make our standard 3-bet raise. The fact that the board's dry shouldn't really affect how we play it too much. This is a spot that I really have a lot of trouble with. Raising here versus like any kind of draws like kind of kills a lot of my equity. Calling obviously, gives him a shot at his outs, but it's going to be really easy to get it in on the turn versus any sizing. That's it's an interesting card to say the least. It should be fine, but if he has Jack 10, we just kind of got sucked out on. And at this point, I'll just... but yeah, I'll just shove at this point because I don't expect him to really be folding anything when he bets out at this. A little worried about a full house, but if he's got it, he's got it. There's not too much that can, there's not too much you can do. Wow, really interesting call. Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, so that's all right. Well, I would not have expected him to show up with an open-ended. I would not expect him to.
An open-ender and an overpair.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good hand, and that's why on the flop, like I wasn't really looking to get it in on the flop because my equity on the flop is like we can even pull it up and look. On the flop, I've got like 67% equity against his specific hand, and that's a good part of his range, but it's not like obviously there's other parts of his range there that are pretty strong too. you know, you're not going to get it in like as a huge favorite. I didn't see what it was on the turn. I'm sure it was quite a bit higher. Yeah, on the turn I'm at 90.91%. So like, and that's kind of interesting too, right? Like even on the turn, like he's still gonna win that 1 out of 10 times. So like, you know, every 10 times that happens, he wins one of them. So like getting, you know, yeah, it's like a looks like kind of like this huge crazy suck out, and it sucks that it happened. But if you don't realize that that's going to happen once in a while, then that's kind of one of the other things that like understanding the math and understanding like all the odds and stuff helps with dealing with tilt, because if you know that that's supposed to happen once in a while, then you can't get as upset about it. Like, I mean, you can, but it doesn't change anything. It doesn't help anything. So that's, I mean, kind of is what it is. But yeah, I don't like his play there, obviously. I mean, he's literally drawing. I mean, first of all, he could be drawing dead if I have pocket jacks, but, you know, best case scenario, he's got 8 outs if all I have is a jack. I mean, he's got to think that a lot of times I've got, yeah, it's just not a great spot for him. Maybe he thought he was priced in. Maybe he was priced in. Not against my hand, but if he just thought, hey, you know, most of the time he's just got a set. I don't know. Rough spot. But let's see what what I can get from here.
Are you looking at Clay's
Yeah,
comments?
yeah.
Okay.
I try to keep a very open mind to stuff in poker, but I feel pretty confident about a lot of the stuff I'm talking about now. Like 3 weeks ago, I was sort of going off of what other people were saying, and now I'm kind of going off of like my understanding has developed quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, somebody asked in the chat, is that how you normally play, like medium pocket pairs by 3-betting? And yeah, what 3-betting often does, for one, it allows you to win a lot pre-flop. It allows you to kind of build this aggressive image. That's all cool and everything, but it also kind of does what's called like capping your opponent's range. If you 3-bet and they flat call, it essentially, like, in a way, it caps their range to a lower, you know, set of hands. Most players will, again, this is you can't guarantee this, but in general, you know, they're going to be re-raising a lot of their big hands when you 3-bet, and so when they flat call, it keeps the amount of hands that they can have. It keeps your range uncapped, but it tends to cap their range. And so when you have an uncapped range, you can represent more hands than they can, which is, again, generally a good thing. So here, wide range, just going to pot it. Well, not sure. So I guess by balanced, I mean balancing my actual range, like, and again, attempting to, because I'm not perfect at this yet. But if I don't, you know, for me being balanced with my actual range is pretty much however I actually choose to balance it, if that makes sense. Like, I don't need to necessarily, it's kind of a weird spot. I don't really know what to do here, so I'm just going to bet. That's generally, if I'm like, I don't know what to do, I just bet. That's because
It's definitely your default.
yeah, it's probably I'll let go ace 10
And it
offsuit.
seems to work.
It's just if I'm kind of on the borderline and I don't really know what to do, I always tend to err on the side of aggression. Yeah, I mean, like, oh wow, I didn't even catch that on that hand. Somebody in the chat mentioned a well, okay, so that's kind of a couple interesting things came up in the chat. We'll go one at a time. Somebody mentioned, so, what do you think of him flatting with queen queen? Because, like, I said that caps our opponent's range. Well, he flatted with queen queen, so he didn't really cap it. His range really wasn't capped. Yeah, I mean, I don't really like that play with queen queen. I mean, I think he should just be re-raising. I'm aggressive on both these tables for the last 176 hands. He's been here at least a while. I'm playing aggressive, but not like crazy. 19, 19, 25, 24. I think he should just be raising. I mean, he was out of position on that hand. Flatting with queens out of position. Probably worth taking a note. I'm glad somebody brought that up. Like, that's a really good point. Here, I'm not going to screw up with tens again. Is this the guy? Oh, no, we talked about him. We don't really have a read on him. Man, we got an under the gun open and a middle position 3-bet from a guy that's not a crazy 3-better. And I don't think... if I call, maybe this guy will call, and then maybe we're deep enough. This is probably too loose. I should probably just fold this. If I call and this guy calls, it gives me pretty good set odds because he's deep. It's a bit of a stretch. I can't count on him calling every time, and flopping a gut shot is not enough in this pot out of position. Maybe if I had I wouldn't have called with anything that hit. And that's another good point. Like, thinking about ranges, like, oh, maybe if I had a backdoor flush draw with a gut shot, it's like, well, there is no hand in my range that fits that. Like, there's no calling hand that I have here that is anything other than like jacks, tens, nines, eights, queens. I would probably re-raise. And this guy's behind, and I'm out of position, so I'm folding. So anyway, I hope that's clear. But yeah, I should probably note that guy flatted queen queen out of position to a 3-bet. And all right, we got like 25 minutes. That was a good show. Good show. Having a good time. This is good. We got a lot of chat. I like having a lot of feedback and comments because that keeps the conversation going. It keeps it interesting. I like it when people challenge my ideas. I don't have a 3-bet bluffing range ever anyway. I bet what's now, I guess, called a linear 3-betting range or depolarized. I don't have a top and bottom of my 3-betting range. I just bet the top of I just 3-bet the top of my range, which is why I still don't really know how to call, which I know that Ed's probably noticed is like I am very uncomfortable calling because I know that every time I call, I'm at the bottom of my range. And I'm like, well, this sucks. Like, it's not good to just blatantly be at the bottom of your range. So that's why people have polarized 3-betting ranges. But it's still like, it still means that when you call, you're in the middle of your range. So I generally, like, I'd be curious to figure out if there's a way to pretty much not have a calling range and have it be... The question isn't whether or not it's profitable or not profitable. That's an important point. But the question is, what is more profitable? And it probably has to be more profitable to have a calling range with certain hands in certain spots than to not have one. And that's why there needs to be some sort of calling range, but it's probably not minus EV to not have a calling range, if that makes sense. Like, folding in the cutoff, like right here, folding in the cutoff 100% is not necessarily, isn't minus EV. You're passing on positive EV situations, but it's not necessarily minus EV. So that's another kind of general concept that's kind of obvious, but maybe people don't know. Yeah, I think we're just using the term balance differently. Maybe I may very well be using it incorrectly. Maybe I'm playing a standard strategy. Like I have a set standard strategy, not it's. I mean, define like balance maybe, and I can tell you if I play balanced or not. But what I mean is that I have and also I might be talking more post flop because yeah, pre flop I don't. Well, I don't do that against anybody. I don't. Against unknowns, you don't want to be balanced. Post flop, I do. Like I want to have an appropriate number of value hands to air hands post flop against everybody. I think I don't know. Maybe I'm not making any sense. Am I not making any sense, Ed?
It's hard to follow. I mean, just
Yeah, I'm kind of confused now too.
I mean, I understand what Clay is saying to a point, although I can't, it's not like I could tell you he definitely means this. But I mean, like, here, especially, I mean, there's kind of the odd thing with Juicy Stakes where he said that you're playing mostly exploitive versus unknowns because you're assuming they're not great. But I think you have to factor in a little bit because of the way that they've segregated the player pool. Well, you may assume that somebody's not great. We can also be fairly sure that they're not terrible, or they probably couldn't be on this table in the first place.
Yeah, I mean
that's correct.
Yeah, it's not really something I'm factoring in. It's certainly a true statement, but it's not what I'm factoring in. I'm taking my strategy that I play. Okay, first of all, caveat. I'm trying. What I'm attempting to do is take the strategy I play and play it against an opponent that knows my exact strategy. So I'm attempting to play in a way in which somebody that knows exactly what ranges I'm doing things with and exactly how I'm playing would be 0 EV against me. So the perfect opponent that plays perfectly against me should be 0 EV. If the perfect opponent playing perfectly against me is 0 EV, then every opponent that deviates from that should be getting
would have to be minus EV.
Would be minus EV or less plus EV against me, I guess, in whatever situation. So if I can get to that, that's what would be called that would be considered a Nash equilibrium. Now, I'm obviously not playing a Nash equilibrium because I haven't done enough work on it. I haven't gotten there. But that's the kind of goal, is to get to the point where against the way I'm playing, any deviation from perfect, like from any deviation from 0, is going to lose them money. And so if I'm playing that way, anyone who's not playing perfectly is going to be slightly minus EV. And then the further they deviate from that, the more minus EV they will be. So that's the goal. I don't think I'm doing it yet, but I'm learning every day as I go. Which is, again, something that, I don't know, have you cracked open that book that that's in the study group yet? The one you said you own? Looks like you bought it after I posted about it. The heads up one?
The expert heads?
Yeah.
Yeah, I read probably 3 or 4 chapters of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
kind of
criticism.
What's that?
Criticism of the book, but I started to bog down in it, and then I also also started to wonder why I'm reading a very complicated book about heads up when I'm playing micro stakes full range. So I put it aside for a while.
How am I? Okay, time out. We'll get back to what you just said, Ed. How am I playing such a low 3-bet percentage? What do you mean such a low 3-bet percentage? What do you find? What do you think the correct? You think 15 or 16% is better than 11.8%?
Maybe it means that there's no 3-bet bluff range. That's what he means by the low side.
You're saying that if I only 3-bet good hands, I won't break even?
See, now I don't agree with what he's saying there with the 50-50 because that assumption would be that you'd be getting called on every 3-bet, and nobody calls 100% of 3-bets.
Well, that implies that every time I 3-bet, I'm going to pay off a huge amount. Also, I mean, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. Anyway, let me answer your question. Yeah, the reason that I wanted to use that book for the study group is because, and the reason I wanted to use it in the study group is because reading it by myself, I was like, I got the same way. I got kind of like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff here. Like, there was so much stuff that I wanted to work through in Card Runners EV. There's a lot of stuff that I thought would be like much better to talk about in like a group to try and understand a little bit better. And so that's why I wanted to do it in a group. And I think that the concepts, I mean, most pots are played heads up. By the time you get to the flop, you're heads up. And so knowing how to play perfectly like in heads up situations is really, really important. So that's why I think it applies, even though it's kind of based around heads up. And it does start off with a lot of like short stack stuff, but I think that's just to kind of get the theory and concepts to be understood a little bit better. Once we, in a couple weeks when we actually get to that book, hopefully it'll make things a little bit more clear. But I mean, I think that a lot can be, once we get through that, a lot can be like derived from that. Oh, I'm still not really.
Well, I think what he's talking about is that you did say earlier that you don't have a 3-bet bluff range, but I'm just going to say, having watched you 3-bet and squeeze, your 3-bet range is certainly not all value. I mean,
right? Yeah, maybe. Right? Yeah, I think. Right. I think I maybe said I may have said I don't bluff. If I said that, that's may or may not be. I don't think like there's no bluffing and value pre-flop, right? I mean, like best case scenario, you've got you're like what 85% is like aces versus ace king. So there's no real bluffs and value pre-flop because the equities are so thin. King queen versus 50% of hands, I think I heard in a video the other day, is like 55% equity. So king queen versus half of all hands is 55%. I mean, does that mean king queen is just straight like for value because it's 55% ahead of half, like a 50% range? Like, no, not really. There's not. I mean, value and bluff pre-flop is kind of obscure. So what I meant, if I said I don't have a bluffing range, what I meant is that I do use a linear range at the top portion of a linear range. So I I don't ever really think of my 3-bets as 3-bet bluffs because I don't know what the flop is yet. I mean, I don't. It's not really a bluff until like you've got something to kind of compare it to, and using it for. All I meant was I three bet a linear range, and that linear range is starts with aces, and goes where it goes. So. So so you're implying that because I three bet a linear range, first of all, I'm assuming that everyone's playing perfectly against me and still breaking even. I promise that you can three bet a range of hands that can still not be exploited, even if it's linear. I've done it in Card Runners EV. That's actually pretty easy to prove. But you're implying that they're going to know exactly which hands are. So if people always fold ace queen and king queen suited against me, then that is awesome. Like, I am perfectly fine with that. That is not an issue at all. I don't really care what people do with ace queen or king queen suited versus my three bets. And here I could easily three bet, but I think let's three bet here. Like, I don't consider this a bluff. Like, I consider this a three bet for value, because I'm going to flop a lot of equity. I'm going to barrel, and he's going to fold a lot. And that is because, value bluff, I don't really know what it is, but I just know that I'm doing it because I think it's plus EV. I don't think doing that with some hands would be plus EV. Maybe against this guy a lot of hands are, but like, some people might want to do that with like king 6 suited or 7-8 suited, and I don't think in the long run that's a plus EV play. That would be what you would call, I think, a 3-bet bluffing range, and that implies that you're not going to make money with that part of your range, whereas I would like to make money with the entirety of my range. Getting down the rabbit hole a little bit. Ed, I promise I promise you will understand it after a month and a half or so of our book club study group. You'll be able to explain this, and you'll probably be able to explain it better than me. So I'm pretty confident. Okay, well, that clears this up. That's exactly what I'm talking about, is game theory optimal. So that's what I was trying to explain. So hopefully but I'm not playing my hand, I'm playing my range. So he said, what if you have aces, kings, ace, king, jacks, and queens? Am I happy that they fold king, queen? The thing is that that's one part of my range. I'm talking about an entire range. I'm not playing an individual hand, I'm playing a range of hands. So with that part of my range, yeah, I hope that I have positive variance and they call with king queen when I have that part of my range. I hope that I have positive variance and they fold when I have, king jack suited and they have king queen. That's irrelevant though. Trying to say that like I'm happy or sad when they do different things with different parts of my range that's not mathematically sound. That's just like emotional. That's just sort of what makes me happy sometimes, or so I think that if we can maybe clean this whole thing up by saying that what I'm trying to discuss is game theory optimal, and maybe balance wasn't the right word. I just mean unexploitable, so maybe I'll stop using the word balance. I do think that game theory optimal probably dictates balanced betting sizes and ranges on all three streets for the most part, but I haven't gotten that deep into it, so maybe it doesn't. But as far as everything I've kind of seen and gotten, the answers I've gotten myself and that I've seen are that it generally it does sort of suggest that kind of betting and balance. What were you gonna say, Ed?
I think I was just going to point out something that he had typed in there, but then you started reading it and responding anyway, so I think we're good there.
Okay.
I was thinking I'm always happy when the villain folds. So I'll take the pot with no risk.
Right. I mean, that's always plus EV. But yeah, I think trying to get wrapped up about bluffs and value is kind of a waste, because really you got to think about the entire expected value of the hand, not even necessarily the equity of the hand, the expected value of the hand, which is different. So one of the things I'm going to be working on, I've got a long weekend, so one of the things I'm going to work on this weekend is getting out. I want to try to finish up all my beginner poker articles over on my website, and that's going to pretty much go through. I've got them written somewhere. I don't know where they're on my laptop, but it's going to be. I've already done the one on hand combinations. I'm going to go over draws, counting outs, pot equity, fold equity, and then I'm going to go through the difference between equity and expected value, which I think some people use EV and equity interchangeably and incorrectly. So I want to kind of go over the actual difference of those after talking about pot equity, fold equity, and expected value, and then just go through some basic practice calculations. I don't know, see if that should kind of wrap up a lot of my beginner articles. So I think instead of what I think most, and my previous approach was, all right, the first thing a beginner needs to learn is opening ranges. I've kind of changed my thought on that to, the first thing a beginner needs to learn about is where all this stuff comes from. I mean, everything everything sort of comes back to the fundamentals and the math. So yeah. Yeah, I agree with everything going on in the chat. I think that maybe it's just the terminology, which I'd be the first to admit I'm not always using everything correctly as far as terminology, so I'll try and clean that up a little bit. I'm still not quite clear on balance versus like game theory optimal and what the difference in those would be, but I don't know. I'll look into it so that it's not as confusing.
Well, I think with true balance, I mean, sometimes that you're definitely playing non-optimally, but basically to throw off your, in theory, observant opponent.
What's that?
I think that with balance, that I think what it suggests is that you're intentionally playing non-optimally some of the time, basically in order to confuse your opponent under the assumption that they're paying attention.
Yeah, there's another thing that there's another that's another interesting thing. I think that when people talk about sort of, maybe again it's just terminology, but when people talk about balancing their ranges or there's another thing, I forget exactly what it's called. I want to say it's something that implies that by accepting a loss on the bottom of your range, you increase the EV of the top of your range. That's kind of another theory out there, whereas game theory optimal implies that every hand you play is plus EV. Or like greater than that you're playing every hand in the most plus EV way, and those are the hands that you include in that range. So that there are no hands that you open knowing I'm going to lose money with this hand. Yeah, I did do that one time. That's a good point. I didn't know we were going to get this heavy into it. It seems like we always do, because it's sort of what I've been doing recently as far as the GTO discussion. But yeah, I didn't know this was going to turn into a huge debate on ranges and GTO, which is it's pretty awesome that it did. I think that's always a good thing.
I think what you were talking about a minute ago, where you're taking losses on the bottom to improve the size of the wins on the top, kind of fits into almost the live play concept, what they call advertising.
Yeah.
that you kind of play in a certain style to mislead people, to make them think, that say that you're playing all loose or you're playing all wild, and then when you make a hand, you get paid off.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Here, with ace three, when people min raise, you need to expand your calling range on the big blind quite a bit. It's just something that you're getting such good odds. You're getting 4-1 on a min raise, 3-1. Yeah, 3-1 on a min raise. A little bit better than that because of the small blind. So it's definitely something that you need to just be calling more. Even if you call and only play when you hit, it's still going to be better than folding every time. Mix in a little bit, pretty much like I would continue with any kind of decent equity there. I would raise, some flushes. I would raise some hands. Call with a pair. Call or raise with gut shots. I don't know what all the correct sort of plays there are, but it's certainly correct to continue if you flop some equity in that spot.
I'm going to read Clay's comment, basically for the benefit of the people who watch this on YouTube later, because I've noticed watching some of the videos later, you miss, obviously all the chat and not really sure what the discussion is about at times. Clay's saying game theory optimal makes it so people can't do anything to exploit you, and balance makes it so no one can read your hand or know if you're doing something for value or for a bluff, and so they're always guessing or paying you off. Game theory optimal people can know exactly what you're doing, but it won't matter what they do. Game theory optimal is a break-even strategy capitalizing on the mistakes of the other players. Balance makes it impossible to play against you or to read you, which hopefully I've got that.
Yeah, I'll read the last part just because you kind of faded out, but the last sentence was balance makes you impossible to play verse and read. Okay. So, Clay, would you say one of those is better or worse than another, or more or less profitable? I actually don't really. I'm not so sure that I see a huge difference between those ideas, because if you're balanced, it's sort of indicating that you're. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure I know that those are totally different ideas.
I mean, I don't think they're completely different, but I do think there are points where they diverge from each other.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think...
and I'm not able to explain any of those points at the moment.
Yeah, I would say that there's... I think that one of the big ideas that, again, and this is for his understanding of ranges versus my understanding of GTO, which either or both may be perfectly correct or slightly wrong in some ways. But from what he's explaining is an idea that you accept that some of your range is negative EV to make you harder to play against, whereas mine is... not mine, I didn't make up game theory, but the idea I'm trying to explain is that you are playing your entire range so that it's plus EV, and it doesn't matter what your opponent does to adjust to you. I would say, though, that if you're perfectly balanced, there's nothing... Your opponent can't adjust to you correctly if you're perfectly balanced. So, yeah, I just... that's the only thing that I'm kind of having a tough time with, is that being perfectly balanced makes you can't exploit that either, because if you, again, it's very, very similar. I'm having a hard time exactly finding a difference, but it's good discussion anyway. Interesting. All right, so pretty good discussion, good show. Looks like we've got about 5 minutes left. So anybody have any other last questions? Maybe I'll do my whole thing where I kind of say that you guys should check out my YouTube channel. I've got YouTube, Facebook page, youtube.com/unexceptionalrounder, facebook.com/urounder, rounderuniversity.com, all that good stuff. Definitely check that out. Join the forums. We've got a lot of discussion like this going on in the forums, so if you're into this kind of thing, head over to the forums, and there's more of it there. So definitely worth checking out. Oh, we could see how we did on this session. I'm pretty sure we're down quite a bit, so that's no big deal, but let's see what it looks like. Wow. Guess how much we're down? Too late.
I think of the hand where you're...
Well, we only lost $3.
Well, that's good after the counterfeited on the boat there.
Yeah, that's no sweat. I'll pull this up real quick so that the viewers can see. But this is the active session. Oh, yeah, I was playing for a little bit before the session started too. So this is like, whoa, this is almost 3 hours. So I played for like an hour before, but I mean, I don't know where an hour is, but I think we were about break even when the session started. So, oops, let me move that so I can actually play whatever's going on back here. So, good session overall, not bad. Obviously the EV was way up because that one hand, but like I've said before, I don't really like looking at the EV too much. Notice non-showdown winnings. I like that to be up. That's cool. Non-showdown winnings is up about $10, something like that. So that's good. Didn't win too many big pots, but we won a lot of small pots and non-showdown situations, which is fine. If I'll pull up sort of the last few sessions or something. Man, I've got notes on this. I've played against this guy a while ago. I'm not sure. This might be a viewer. I don't know what to do here. I'll just fold. I don't know. That's terrible. I'm so bad at calling. I really don't like doing it. That was a call. That's just, it's a call. The problem is that eights is a strong hand. Eights can flop an overpair, so it's worth calling there. But you're still kind of set mining with that hand, and that's why I don't like calling out of position trying to set mine, and that's why I'd much rather 3-bet it. And maybe 3-betting it would have been plus EV too. It almost, certainly would have been plus EV. Here, with a few players, I can flat. Let me pull this graph up real quick, and then we'll call it a show. I'm gonna just filter between 3 and 6 players, and we just called there, and then I'll just go to dates. I'll say we'll just say May, so this month, and see how we're doing. Kind of shaky. This is the first month that I've been in that kind of higher. Let me try to get this so it's all. Yeah, that should have most of it on the screen. So, been a little shaky with moving up to the higher kind of skill level, but still pretty good. Still, for the most part, going up. I'm not sure what big blinds look like, and I don't really like EV being on there. So, yeah, I mean, we can see that still kind of having a tough time with the blue line and red line stuff. But part of it, I think, it has a good bit to do with moving up to the more challenging group of players. But overall, I think it's still going all right. I think I'm still profitable, and I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Not sure what this looks like. That looks like my overall stuff. So yeah, I mean, still doing all right. Big blinds, you know, doesn't clearly quite a bit with rake back. 20 no limit's been kind of tough. I don't know. I thought that was heads up, but the 20 no limit's been a really tough level. That's why I'm kind of going to. Oops, let me set these out. I'm going to be playing a lot more 20 no limit. I'm going to try to get to the point where I can 6-table. On this computer, I have no problem with it. On my laptop, it's a little busy. So, let's see. All right, so that was a good show. Thank you guys for coming out. Make sure you check out, head over to YouTube, leave a comment or whatever if you want. And same time next week. Ed, got anything? Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate having you.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yep, good discussion, and had a good time. So until next time, you guys, this is Unexceptional Rounder, and keep on grinding.